mpaka Ijumaa, moja kwa moja kutoka VOA Swahili, Washington.
Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Yuat. It's Monday, October 24th. This is Africa 54.
Ethiopian and Tigrayan officials are now in South Africa for African Union-sponsored peace talks to end 2 years of conflict. Somali insurgents attack a Kismayo hotel with a bomb and bullets. 8 people are dead. As the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Africa Business Center hold their first African Digital Innovation Competition for African startups, we'll show you how a Nigerian created a healthcare app. All this and much more on today's Africa 54.
Cloaked in secrecy, Ethiopian government officials and representatives of the Tigray forces are meeting at an undisclosed location in South Africa for peace talks on Monday. Ethiopia's civil war has killed thousands, displaced millions, and millions are on the brink of famine. Paul Ndiho has more.
The highly anticipated Africa Union-sponsored peace talks between Ethiopian government officials and Tigray forces are underway in South Africa. This is the first time since war broke out 2 years ago that the two parties are meeting. Ethiopian forces and their allies have recently made battlefield gains in the northern Tigray region, where they have captured several large towns in the past week. The conflict is attracting international attention as Pope Francis offered his prayers for Ethiopia on Sunday at the Vatican.
Seguo la persistente situazione di conflitto in Ethiopia.
I follow with concern about the ongoing conflict in Ethiopia. Once again, I heartily reiterate that violence does not solve problems, but only increases their tragic consequences. I appeal to political leaders to end the suffering of the defenseless people and find equitable solutions for lasting peace throughout the country. May the parties' efforts for dialogue and the pursuit of the common good lead to a concrete path of reconciliation.
The civil war in Ethiopia is rooted in a power struggle between the federal government and Tigray authorities, who led the country's ruling coalition until Abiy Ahmed became prime minister in 2018. International pressure for a halt to violence in Tigray is mounting. Fighting resumed in August, shattering a truce and halting aid into Tigray, a region of 6 million people that lack food, medicine, and other life-saving essentials. The Ethiopian government is vowing to seize airports and other federal assets from the control of Tigray forces. The peace talks come as the United Nations Security Council prepares to meet on Friday to discuss the worsening violence. The Tigray People's Liberation Front dominated Ethiopia's ruling political alliance for decades before Abiy Ahmed became prime minister in 2018 and sidelined the party. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of protesters gathered at Maxwell Square in Addis Ababa over the weekend to denounce the TPLF and accuse the West for siding with them by providing the group with arms. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
For more on Ethiopia's conflict and the ongoing peace talks, Africa 54 managing editor Vincent Makori dives into the story with an analyst. Hello, Vincent.
Hello, thank you, Esther. So as we've mentioned there, the military and allies of the Ethiopian government, especially Eritrea, have been battling the Tigrayan forces on the northern part of the country, and this war has displaced hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, in fact, thousands have died, and many more, thousands, have been left without food. Now, we want to show you exactly what's going on. Before we can get to give you some details, I want to go and talk to Paul Nantulia. Before we go to my colleague, my guest, Paul Nantulia, let's go to South Africa first to hear what Tuso Khumalo has from Johannesburg. Tuso.
The peace talks between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray forces have been scheduled for today in South Africa, but authorities here have refused to confirm if indeed the talks are taking place, what time and where. I asked the International Relations Department about the talks, and this is the response I got from the department's public diplomacy officer, Clayson Monyela. I quote, "The Department of International Relations has not issued any media statement on this matter. Please check with the people who communicated about the talks," close quote. What we know is that the Tigray forces spokesperson have tweeted that the Tigray delegation had arrived in South Africa. The negotiations are being mediated by the African Union. The Ethiopian government also confirmed in a statement that its delegation left for South Africa on Monday. It's a brutal war that has killed thousands and left many homeless. The parties are hoping that at the end of the meeting, they will at least agree on a ceasefire that will allow humanitarian assistance and maybe peace. With peace talks details being sketchy at the moment, hopes are that when the parties emerge from the talks, at least they will have some good news. Tuso Khumalo for VOA News, Johannesburg.
Right, we didn't want to leave out. That's Tuso Khumalo reporting from South Africa. So, as we just mentioned, the conflict in the northern part of Ethiopia, in the Tigray region, has been raging on for the last 2 years. And now, here are some details we just want to share with you. First, we want to look at Ethiopia and see the region as we know it. The Addis Ababa, as we can see, the Addis Ababa, the government forces of the Ethiopian government have been confronting the TPLF forces in the northern part of the country. Now, to the north where we see Tigray region, just last week, the government of Ethiopia intensified its attacks, airstrikes in that region, and captured 3 towns. Now, one of the towns that was captured was Shire. Now, Shire is a big city there. It has an airport, and it is said to be hosting thousands of some of the other Ethiopians from that region who have been displaced by the war. Now, that city is about 140 kilometers from the capital, Mekelle, and the other 2 cities that have been captured are Korem and Alamata. Now, Korem is about 170 kilometers away from Mekelle, the capital of the Tigray regional, which is Mekelle, and also Alamata is about 180 kilometers away from Mekelle, the regional capital. Here are some of the things we know about the situation there. According to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, up to 2.6 million people are internally displaced in that particular region because of the conflict. And again, according to the UNHCR, about 9.4 million people have also been displaced, but they're in urgent need of food and other essential aid. So the 9.4 million people, whether they're in their homes or they've been displaced, need food and other medical aid urgently, and most of them have not been able to access this, according to humanitarian organizations, because of the conflict. And so the situation is dire. Now, we just mentioned that the peace talks have been called to South Africa, mediated by the African Union, although we don't know the venue yet. But the question is, what is at stake in South Africa, and what are these talks all about? And this is the moment when I turn to Paul Nantulia, who is a research specialist at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. He is joining me via Skype from here in Washington. And Paul, I want to begin just right there. First, what is at stake in these talks as the warring parties now meet in South Africa?
Well, thank you, Vincent. It's great to be on the show once again. No, as you've mentioned, there's a lot at stake in this crisis. The first is Ethiopia is a major African power, very strategically located in the Horn of Africa, close to the Red Sea, plays a huge role in regional security efforts, including counterterrorism, including stabilization efforts in Somalia. And Ethiopia has also for many years been among the top 20 fastest growing economies, not just in Africa, but the world. Ethiopia is the seat of the African Union. Ethiopia hosts many UN agencies, including the UN Commission for Africa. Ethiopia hosts some of the security infrastructure of the African peace and security architecture, and hosts numerous diplomatic initiatives. For instance, IGAD and others. So there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake. And for Ethiopia to be unstable is not good for the continent.
Now, many have been watching this conflict go on, and the question has been, why is it, or has it seemingly been very difficult to bring the two sides together, get into a state of peace and at least a truce that could hold?
Three reasons, Vincent. First is the severity of the conflict. This is an internal crisis and a power struggle within the TPLF, which was at the core of the ruling coalition. The ruling coalition, the coalition that ruled Ethiopia from the overthrow of Mengistu up to 2018, had a violent split within it, which also affected the military. So the severity of the conflict is a major reason as to why it has been very difficult to get all these sides to the table. I mean, Abiy himself grew up in the TPLF-led coalition. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that you've had multiple and in some cases competing and parallel peace initiatives coming from the external, from external partners. And when you have that, the protagonists in any conflict situation, they tend to play one mediator of the other. The third reason, Vincent, is that the parties do believe for the moment that they can achieve their objectives on the battlefield. And until you get to a situation where they believe that they can actually speak on the table in good faith, it will be very, very difficult to arrive at a truce.
Now, very quickly, the African Union is mediating this current talks. What is your assessment of the African Union's mechanism to resolve conflicts on the continent?
It's been a little mixed because right from the beginning, the Tigray elite and the leadership within the TPLF and the Tigray regional government have complained that the African Union was not impartial, given that the designated mediator, Olusegun Obasanjo, was seen to have legitimized the elections that took place, which were extremely controversial from the perspective of the opposition, not just Tigray, but the larger opposition in Ethiopia. And so immediately from day one, the African Union process was not viewed as neutral, and credible by a party to the crisis. So that is the first issue. The second issue is it is very, very difficult, and we've seen this even before in the Mengistu years. There is a tradition within the African Union that matters evolve in conflict in Ethiopia tend to be very, very sensitive, simply because it's the host of the AU. So it's very difficult.
It's definitely a conversation we'll continue, especially as the talks take place in South Africa. Thank you very much, Paul. That is Paul Nantulia, who is a research specialist at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Esther, back to you.
Vincent, thank you. Vincent Makori is Africa 54 managing editor. Turning to South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa says he will implement many of the recommendations made by a panel leading a graft probe into mismanagement of state funds under his predecessor, Jacob Zuma. Ramaphosa is also embroiled in a scandal following an alleged robbery at one of his properties 2 years ago, where he allegedly hid millions of dollars in cash inside couches. Ramaphosa spoke about the panel recommendations.
The corruption that was perpetrated in our country is a crime against the people of South Africa. Corruption is a betrayal of our democracy, and it is also an assault on the institutions that we established together to advance the values of our Constitution and the interests of our people. The money that was stolen robbed our people of resources that should have led to the development of our country and improved the livelihoods of our people. The State Capture Commission report concluded that there can be no doubt that state capture happened in South Africa. In the main, government accepts the findings of the Commission with respect to the existence, the nature, and the extent of state capture in South Africa. This administration is firmly committed to undertake this task, to combat corruption in all its forms, in every part of government and in every sphere of the state. Those who are involved in corruption, or who are even thinking about engaging in criminal conduct, must know that all the instruments of the state will be used to bring them to book. There will be no place for corrupt people, for criminal networks, for perpetrators of state capture to hide.
The scandal risks derailing Ramaphosa's bid for a second term as ANC president as the party heads to hotly contested internal polls in December. At least 8 people were killed in Somalia after militants attacked a hotel in Kismayo, according to the Associated Press. The assault started with a suicide bombing Sunday before gunmen forcibly entered and exchanged fire with security. Security forces from Jubaland later ended the siege, killing the gunmen and rescuing scores of people, according to state media. Authorities say government officials and traditional elders were eating lunch at the Tawakal Hotel at the time of the explosion. The Islamic extremist group al-Shabab is claiming responsibility for the attack. The hotel is popular as a meeting place for government officials. Former British Treasury Chief Rishi Sunak is set to become Britain's next Prime Minister after winning the Conservative leadership race. He now faces the huge task of stabilizing the party and country at a time of economic and political turbulence. He will be Britain's first leader of color and the nation's third leader just this year. Sunak will take over as Prime Minister from Liz Truss. Sunak will be the first Prime Minister of South Asian heritage and the youngest in 200 years. Uganda is reporting 9 cases of more Ebola cases in Kampala, bringing the total number of known infections to 14 in the last 2 days, according to the country's health minister, Jane Ruth Acheng. Acheng says 7 of the 9 who tested positive on Sunday are family members of a man who died of the disease. There have been more than 90 confirmed and probable cases in Uganda since the start of the outbreak, including at least 44 deaths, according to statements by the World Health Organization and Uganda's health ministry. The virus that is circulating in Uganda is the Sudan strain of Ebola, for which there is no proven vaccine. And joining me live via Skype from Kampala is Elijah Okeyo, Uganda's country director for the International Rescue Committee. Elijah, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin by you telling us what's really driving this current wave of Ebola in Uganda.
So today marks the 35th day since Ebola was declared in Uganda, and that's a approach. We have seen also that in the last 24 hours, we have had 15 new cases that have been confirmed. I think the drive, if you ask me, can be attributed to a number of things. First, the myths and misconceptions within the community with categorized as high risk, where some of the community members don't understand that they need to take certain precautions instituted by the Ministry of Health. So that perpetuates the transmission, human to human. There are also low-risk perception by people. They don't take it serious, especially areas where there's not been Ebola.
Elijah, right. What has been the impact of this Ebola outbreak in Uganda for the East Africa region?
Within East Africa, there's been meetings within the states, authorities to come together and understand, come up with a plan on how to contain and mitigate the spread. We've had meetings here in Uganda within the authorities within the region come together to work on the plan. There's many significant challenges with this because apart from the loss of life, the economy is affected, the health system is affected, because every focus now is on how to contain Ebola. So movement is restricted. Within Uganda, we have 2 districts, the epicenter, the nearby districts where we have the lockdown. They can't move out and people can't go in except for the response team. So there are significant challenges with Ebola, and I think within the region people are on high alert and preparedness.
Right, Elijah, thank you so much for your insight into what's happening in Uganda and the region. Elijah Okeyo is Uganda's country director for the International Rescue Committee. Still to come, our profiles on the Africa Digital Innovation Competition continues with Nigeria's Imodoye Abioro. In other news, Sudan's ruling military fired Major General Ramzi Babakar from his post in southern Blue Nile province. The action follows 2 days of tribal clashes that killed at least 220 people last week. Cameroon's authorities say they are struggling to contain a cholera outbreak at the overcrowded Minawao refugee camp on its northern border with Nigeria. Chinese President Xi Jinping has secured a 3rd term as General Secretary of the ruling Communist Party, loading the new Politburo Standing Committee with allies. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce's U.S.-Africa Business Center is convening its first annual Africa Digital Innovation Competition for African startups. VOA is working as a media partner with the Africa Business Center on this initiative. Out of 17,000 candidates in 50 countries in Africa, 10 have been selected as finalists. Today, we'll highlight one of the finalists, Imodoye Abioro from Nigeria, whose startup Healthbotics Lend an Arm created a healthcare application that procures medical supplies more efficiently.
My name is Imodoye Abioro. I'm a medical doctor. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Healthbotics Limited, the creators of Lend an Arm. I'm 28 years old and I'm from Ogun State here in Nigeria. I applied to the 2022 Africa Digital Innovation Competition because of my belief in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as they were one of the first organizations that helped us and gave us support back in the early days of our pilot. What it means to me to be one of the top 10 finalists is a testament to the incredible amount of work that my colleagues and I have put at Lend an Arm. Lend an Arm being one of the top 10 innovations at this competition means that conversation is changing. People are now paying attention to what happens at the last mile of healthcare delivery, and that makes us very happy. Lend an Arm is a single turnkey solution for hospital procurements at the last mile. So typically what would happen would be that hospitals would interface with almost 5-6 different agents before getting their procurement needs every single month. Lend-A-Nom is a solution that centralizes that entire process, allowing hospitals to get all of their required inputs from a single access point. We source and procure and deliver to their doorstep. Stockouts are the single most common cause of mortality in primary health care. Stockouts of drugs, oxygen, blood, and essentials like that. These are the problems that Lend-A-Nom specifically tackles. The hospitals with support see an average of 1,500,000 patients in a year, about 20 to 30 patients every day. And when you add that together, that's over 1 million patients every year that these hospitals see. What's the first thing I would do if we win the competition? That's very interesting. I'll probably call my co-founder, share the good news with them, and probably call my parents as well. But most importantly, I would be sure to inform our current customers that their plight and the solution we're providing to that has gotten international recognition and support from the people who really matter.
On Tuesday, Zimbabwe's Ryan Kataye will tell us about his app, A Farm Heart. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.
Money continues to be the lifeblood of terrorists. We must bolster our efforts to go after financiers and financial facilitators of terrorists and terrorist organizations, and we must stymie vital resource streams that take advantage of weak regulatory oversight. One of the most immediate and growing concerns in Africa is the Kremlin-backed Wagner Group's strategy of exploiting the natural resources of the Central African Republic, Mali, and Sudan, as well as other countries. These actions are thoroughly documented and irrefutable, and we know these ill-gotten gains are used to fund Moscow's war machine in Africa, the Middle East, and Ukraine. Member states must take a more proactive approach to countering al-Qaeda and ISIS in Africa. We all have an interest in countering the illicit trafficking of natural resources in Africa, which amounts to stealing wealth away from the people of Africa. It is in our interest to prevent traffickers from using their criminal activities and their illicit wealth to fuel conflict and terrorism.